Well done. The first item on the agenda for tonight is to have our newest board member read her oath of office. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you. Is this already on?
Yes, it is.
Is there a mic on? Okay. I, Karen Holweg, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America and of the State of Colorado and the Charter and ordinances of the City of Boulder, and faithfully perform the duties of the office of a member of the Open Space Board of Trustees, which I am about to enter.
Great.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you. Say amen.
The second item on the agenda is nominations for the chair and vice chair of the board. And I am, as acting chair, going to make a nomination. I, Kevin Bracey Knight, would like to nominate Tom Isaacson for board chair.
Second.
Are there any other nominations? Vote, then?
All those in favor?
All those in favor? Sorry.
Okay.
Okay, so therefore, Tom can take over as the chair of the board. Do you want to move over here?
No, it's okay.
All right.
So the next order of business is the election of the vice chair, and should probably start by asking Kevin, since you are the current vice chair, if you'd be interested in serving another term, or if you'd prefer to pass that to someone else.
If need be, I will serve another term, but I would actually prefer to nominate Kurt as vice chair, because that gives a great lead up for him for any future chairing when I'm going to be gone anyways in a year.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll second the nomination. If any other nominations to be the vice chair? Okay.
Nope.
Then all in favor of Kurt Brown as vice chair of the Open Space Board of Trustees? Okay, that's unanimous. The third is election of our secretary, which has been Leah Case for quite a few years now. I spoke with Leah, and I understand you're interested in continuing to serve as secretary.
Continuing to
Tracy.
check.
Yes,
Yeah.
So I'll nominate Leah Case as secretary of the Open Space Board of Trustees.
I'll second.
Okay, any other nominations? Okay, all in favor? All right, so that's unanimous.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Leah.
So, the next item is the minutes from the March 14th meeting. Does anyone have any amendments to the minutes? All right. Do we have a motion to approve?
I move to approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
All in favor? Right.
I have to abstain because I wasn't here.
Right.
Yeah, and it looks like Karen also
I'm
abstained.
Right, so
You were here, but in a different role. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is public participation for items not identified for a public hearing, which would be anything other than the honoring of the volunteer services. So we have two people signed up, and just come on down. The first, and as always, apologies if I butcher anyone's name. The first is Selene Tholens, and the second is Kathy Joyner.
Hi. I want to thank the board for its past support in moving the South Boulder Creek flood mitigation project along over the past few years. The thousands of us who live in harm's way very much appreciate your efforts. For decades, the city of Boulder has tried to implement the South Boulder flood mitigation to protect those of us downstream of US 36. Now that we have concepts for an effective mitigation alternative and the necessary partnerships in place, please seize this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to improve the health and safety of so many of us living in harm's way. Flash floods, potentially worse than the ones we've known in 2013, can happen anytime. Our lives and the lives of our loved ones depend on your decision to move this project along as fast as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Selene. Kathy? And if you could, please state your address when you begin.
Kathy, excuse me, Kathy Joyner, 4960 Quala Drive. Once again, I want to thank you all for your support for the past support of the South Boulder Creek Flood Mitigation Project. You have had a significant role in how far we've come over the last 5 years, and we appreciate your concern. We understand that in the coming weeks or months, staff will be presenting several conceptual flood mitigation alternatives to you for your opinion. We are hopeful that one, if not all, will not only be an effective flood mitigation plan, but will also contribute to enhancements to city open space. Like you, we are all concerned about the health of city open space. It's one of the things that makes Boulder so unique. We are hopeful that potential positives for OSMP lands will become a viable part of the flood mitigation solution. Please keep the downstreamers in mind as this project moves forward, as so many of us continue to live in harm's way. After almost 5 years since the catastrophic flooding, we very much appreciate your continuing support in helping to get this critical flood mitigation project completed as soon as possible. As you know, our lives and safety depend upon it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Next is matters from the department.
Our first item is an update on the draft 2018 work plan and budget. While Lauren's getting set up, though, I would like to highlight that you have a flyer in front of you for a mountain lion research presentation, and that's tomorrow night, and it's from 6:30 to 8 at the Boulder County Courthouse in the third floor hearing room. Just want to highlight that OSMP land was a focus of this research project, and if you go or if you don't go, but you would like to have some more information about it, we can arrange an update to you in the future if you'd like. But I encourage you to go if you have the time.
Thanks.
Cool. Okay. So, can you hear me? Okay. Lauren Kilcoyne, Business Services Supervisor, here to talk about the draft 2019 budget and work plan. And this is actually the first of 5 budget presentations over the next... So this will be the first touch of 5. The first 3 presentations will focus on our capital improvement program, or CIP. And then in July, we'll switch our focus to the operating budget. And the purpose of tonight is really to be pretty high level, talk about overarching issues, guiding principles, and your thoughts on that as we move forward. Next month, we'll be bringing some draft projects for you to review with a clearer financial picture and some numbers to actually be looking at before a public hearing, discussion, and recommendation in June. And for the purposes of tonight, we're going to touch on the citywide economic forecast and how that affects OSMP in particular in light of our expiring sales tax increments and other things. We'll touch on our draft 2019 department priority projects, our budget guiding principles, which I know we've talked about for the last several years, and then our 4 budget policy issues that we'll be submitting to the executive budget team later this week, kind of giving them a heads up about what's going on in OSMP before the budget season really kicks off. So you've probably heard by now, citywide, we have a flattening revenue from retail sales and use tax. And we've sort of, over the last few years, been preparing for this situation. The last couple of years when we've come to these presentations, we've said, there's mixed economic indicators. It's not super clear what's happening in Boulder as it compares to the state and national economy. And we've built really conservative budgets, just saying, we need to wait and see what happens. We need to be appropriate in our spending as we figure out what those numbers will look like. So now it's looking like we know a little bit more, and we'll be getting real numbers from the budget office in the next few weeks. But as of now, we're operating on kind of a no-growth revenue scenario. We're not talking about declining revenues, but just that they've leveled off and flattened, and we want to be, again, appropriate and conservative as we approach 2019. So our CIP and our operating budget will reflect that changing revenue forecast, and we'll continue to get information from our partners in finance over the next several months that will inform the budgets that you see. And as that affects OSMP, we're actually in a really good position as we think about flattening revenues because we've known that these two expiring sales tax increments were coming. Basically, since they were voted on, we've planned on 2019 and 2020 being a time for OSMP revenues to level off. So this certainly adds a level of intensity, but we feel like we've been getting ready for this for several years. So when we come next month, what you'll see in our fund financial is continuing our strong reserves. A couple years ago, we increased the contingency reserve to be 20% of our operating and debt costs because we recognized how sales tax dependent the department is. And we've maintained fund balance, again, preparing for this day. We've also incorporated appropriate debt payments. So 10 years ago, when we issued the 06 and 07 general obligation bonds, those repayment schedules were timed with the expiring sales tax increments over the next 2 years. So we'll make final payments on the 07 bond next year and 06 after that, and so you'll see a significant decrease in our annual debt service moving forward. We will also reflect all of our improved work planning efforts. This is actually our first year with a new work planning software that we've been using across the department. And it's been an unbelievable work effort on the part of so many staff to get this up and running. But it allows us to really look at projects across the department, the way we prioritize our work, and how that influences our CIP. So we'll have a work plan set before our budget, which sounds like a small thing, but is not. And we've been actually working on the 2019 CIP since January across the staff. So I'm really excited about how that impacts our budget process and all of the continuous improvement, and you'll see that show up in our CIP. And finally, we want to make sure that we're balancing our approach and that we're looking at all our functions and expenditure types equally. So we will be looking at some budget reductions in the 2019 budget, mostly from process improvements and business efficiencies. But what we don't want to do is say, okay, we've got flattening revenues, let's cut our capital investment or let's cut our operating budgets. We want to take a really holistic approach and make sure that it's balanced across all of the parts of our fund financial. And you may have also heard or seen stories about the general fund lately and the $4 million gap that they've been working to make up. And so what our partners in finance have asked from general funded departments is a 5% reduction in expenditures for 2019. We'll actually be matching that 5% over the 6-year CIP horizon. And again, most of that was planned. That was looking at how we're dealing with our debt, moving on from FEMA reimbursable flood recovery projects, which were very expensive, and saying, what is it we want to spend on an annual basis when we're not responding to an emergency? So we feel like it will at least be 5% over 6 years, but I think it shows a great approach and consistency citywide that even though we're not primarily funded by the general fund, we're taking this really seriously and approaching this as really good stewards of public dollars. We'll also be focusing on deobligating our capital carryover, and this was something that we talked about last year. As we've been responding to the flood and completing FEMA reimbursable flood recovery projects, we've had a number of previously funded projects, like from the 2012 and 2013 work plans, that we've been deferring. So we've been carrying those dollars on our budget for several years, not knowing when we could bring them back onto the work plan, and also not knowing what flood recovery was going to cost. So we didn't want to deobligate money and then need it if a flood recovery project was particularly expensive. And we're not done yet. We've still got a few FEMA flood recovery projects out there, but we're in a place now where we know those true costs, and we know that we don't actually need to keep obligating those dollars each year, if that makes sense. So we actually identified $3.2 million in capital projects that we won't need to bring with us into 2018. We'll deobligate those dollars. They'll be reassigned to our fund balance, and then we can appropriate them based on the needs moving on from the flood. And finally, this will be a focus of July and August, but I do just want to put it out there that you will be seeing some expiring positions throughout this budget process. And our approach has been to focus on attrition, retirements, and natural turnover, and looking at, okay, with a vacancy, what's the greatest department need for that position? Or have we found any number of business efficiencies that tell us we no longer need the position? So I'll use an example from my work group, and it's a win-win. It's a win for us and a win for our customers, I think. You may have heard we've gone live with annual parking permit sales online, commercial and special use permits online. We've identified all of this technology that we could utilize to reallocate some of the staff time in the business services work group to the point where we can actually expire an admin position through this budget process. So that's really our focus. Where are there efficiencies? Where does this make sense? We've spent several years staffing up in the appropriate places, and I think we're in a great position to be able to do this moving forward. So shifting gears a little bit, I put department priorities up there and was reminded that this certainly does not capture all of our work. We have any number of core services that we're going to be continuing to do. But this is to say, in light of the system overview report, in light of all of the capital and other projects that we've got coming online, these are the things that we want to go to work on. And we continue our acquisition and our land stewardship and everything else that we do, but we'll have an increased focus on this. So the department priorities for 2019 are a little bit of a hybrid of what you saw last year and the system overview report. And we hope that as we move forward with the master plan, any department priority would align with recommendations of the master plan. But we're in this interim time right now, so you'll see that most of these align with those snapshots from that report. And of course, our goal is to continue to work on the master plan and complete it in 2019, continue our water and floodplain management. We have a number of non-FEMA flood recovery projects that we'll continue to work on, as well as our other floodplain work, to preserve and restore our natural resources, preserve and enhance our agricultural resources, and a lot of those recommendations will come out of the Ag Plan from 2017. Facilitate visitor enjoyment, maintain facilities and amenities, connect people with nature. This next one is a little bit of a hybrid. You saw last year focus on regional trails. So what we're hoping to do is broaden that and look at regional collaboration in any number of fronts. How do we deal with species that migrate across our land and county land, and making sure that we're taking a holistic approach to that. So we've shifted that to be regional collaboration. And then again, we'll have a focus on continuous improvement. We're making big investments in project management training and work planning, as I've already mentioned, and we want to continue to get better at how we steward the land and these dollars, and make sure we're just always improving. And these you're probably used to seeing, and they haven't changed, and I think this kind of reflects the theme we talked about last year of starting to shift towards stewardship, increased investment in stewardship activities. We want to make sure that our first priority in our CIP and our operating budget is to take care of what we have first. And while we've spent the last 4 years recovering from a flood, we know any number of deferred maintenance projects have built up, and now's the time to start getting back to that and taking care of the land system as we had planned to before the flood happened. But stick to the plan, adapt and learn, safety first. These are kind of the cornerstones of how we're approaching our work plan and our budget process. And finally, we have 4 budget policy issues, and these are kind of our heads up to the executive budget team to say, here's everything that's going on in the department. So we've already talked about this, but we're planning for the expiring sales tax increments at the same time as we're experiencing flattening revenues, and that will have an effect, of course. So our focus, again, is on stewardship and building conservative budgets and making sure that everything we do doesn't just get us through 19, but sets us up for success over the entire 6-year planning horizon and beyond. We're also developing a master plan, and that policy issue focuses on efforts to date and the process committee and how we're looking at those engagement windows and engaging our community. The master plan also has financial implications, and we'll have fiscally constrained and action planning and kind of vision scenarios coming out of the master plan. Campus relocation, that's come up for the last couple of years. We'll be moving to our interim hub location in July, and at that time we'll be forming an internal team to start thinking about the long-term vision for our campus and what that looks like. And through this policy issue, we're actually saying that our preference right now is to redevelop the Cherryvale site for a number of reasons. But when we get into that interim location is when our staff team will really start to put together a plan for that and make sure there are no fatal flaws and that we have backups, and we're thinking about this well in advance. And we expect that to take anywhere from 3 to 5 years around to really plan for that future space. And it's probably worth noting, in the 2018 approved budget, the campus relocation shows up under land acquisition, and that was because we didn't know if we would have to acquire a parcel for our future space. And so by saying our preference is Cherryville, what you'll notice in the 2019 CIP is that shifts out of land acquisition, that funding, and it will move into new facility infrastructure as a category. So I know that was, it's a point of confusion, and we didn't know enough to say last year how we were going to approach that project, so that's a shift that you'll see. And finally, again, this will be more of a focus in July and August, but we're always looking at our internal operations and staffing approach. I've already talked about work planning and project management and process improvements. But every year for the last 4 years, we've submitted a staffing-related policy issue to the executive budget team. In 2015, we had an organizational assessment and reorganized the way some of those work groups were structured in the department. In 2016 and 17, we job studied 100% of our standard positions in the department, and some of them hadn't been studied since about 2000. So that was a huge undertaking. And simultaneously, we were working on employee classification with the Affordable Care Act and the city living wage, where we had seasonal and temporary staff working 9 months. Well, that's not a season. They're a part of our ongoing operations, and let's treat them appropriately and make sure that they have appropriate benefits through the Affordable Care Act. So even though that wasn't a change in headcount, it was a change in our FTE, 16.75 positions. So it was a change of 12 FTE, and you'll notice that when we bring our operating materials. And finally, last year, we managed our fixed-term positions. So we had 11 fixed-term positions across the department, and we converted 6 of them to ongoing. We extended 1 fixed-term position for another 2 years, and we were able to expire 4 positions because they were created for succession planning or one-time projects, and those things sort of happened as we expected them to, and we were able to expire those positions last year. So again, our focus is on attrition moving forward. How can we repurpose positions or reduce our FTE through efficiencies, and use all of those assessment results from facilities and trails condition, our org assessment, to inform our budget and the way that we handle FTE moving forward. So I think that's it. If you have any questions or feedback, I'll try to answer them, and if I don't have an answer, I will bring one with me next month.
Anyone?
I'd be happy to start. Thank you, as always. I'll try to keep this at a high level because I think that's appropriate for where we are right now, and it's great we're having this discussion early. But it just seems to me this is a special year for the budget for multiple reasons, but the main one being this fiscal year we're planning for, and the next one we lose how many million in revenue?
How many million in revenue? Over the next 2 years, it'll be a 26 to 30% decrease,
Right.
Several million.
Right. I say about 9 million. We're also going into a master planning process, or we're in it, and to me, it's a certainty that budget and finance is going to be a focus area for discussion. And so I think that puts a special burden on the ability of these budget documents to explain all of this to people that never look at these budget documents. And so I think we have to find ways to tell at least a couple of stories really clearly. One is the budget challenges we face in the next 2 years and then ongoing, because to me they seem enormous. You guys have been figuring out how to deal with them for a lot longer than we have, so I think you're not as panicked as some of us are. But the public may or may not understand that. So what are the budget challenges that we face? And that would include reconstructing a campus for the department. The other would be the things you've been doing and will be doing to adapt to these big changes in our inflow of revenue. You enumerated a number of them, but I would look for ways to have those stories told clearly up front, partly because we're going to want to steal all of that and use it in the master planning discussions. And that's going to be difficult. I mean, I'm starting to get used to looking at these budgets, but we're going to have a lot of the public involved that, while they may know a lot about open space, they're not budget wonks necessarily. And it's going to be important to describe the challenges, our adaptation, and the choices that this forces us into. Because, frankly, I mean, I got out my computer and tried to calculate the amount of money we're losing. we shouldn't have to have our readers do that. That should be right up front and clear so that people know the challenges we're facing. So those are my sort of overarching thoughts, and I will defer to whoever's next at this point. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
I totally agree with you, Kurt. And there are several places in the system overview report where I think those kinds of elucidations and making things crystal clear to the public can happen. The other thing that I'm concerned about is the major challenges that we still have on our plate, and in a declining budget, how we address those. And it's clear to me that it's going to be very important to keep focusing on taking care of what we have and avoid new initiatives that cost more money in a declining budget. So I think all of those things bear really clear presentations of information to the public on the order of things like infographics and tables rather than complex budget information.
And one thing I might add too is that in part of the plan process, but also part of what might help us out is to kind of present us with a range or a fork in the road as we're talking about things like moving from acquisition-based to a more maintenance and restoration-based philosophy. I don't see that really reflected here as like, if we go more this way, that would happen, or if we go more that way, this other thing would happen. And I think that even for us here, before we're done with the master plan, like having a sense of consequence, because none of this seems to be like, we're changing. I look at real estate acquisition and the numbers are declining, but then I look at something like the TSA implementations and they're declining, and regional trails and those decline, and et cetera, instead of like a clear sense of how prioritization is changing. And to present that to us in some way, I think it would be really helpful, because I'm struggling with understanding how we're actually changing our priorities and how that's manifesting in our budget.
To build off of that, with all of these budget documents, we always do a great job of looking into the future, but very rarely is enough of the past captured in a way that's really accessible. So, you know, going 1 year back, that's great, but to really have that sense of trends, seeing the contraction that the department has already undergone to some extent, and being able to compare that to the cliff we're about to go off, I think would help to give the community scale of what we're talking about. So I definitely encourage going back probably 5 years when you develop these graphics to show what we've been doing in comparison to where we're going.
And building on. I think one thing that might also be helpful is to put in concrete nuggets of like what was acquired or spent. Like last year we spent $4 million on properties. We bought this many acres. These are the, a couple of names or whatever, just something like that. So we get a sense of like, okay, our normal budget is $10 million for acquisition. We bought 5 properties with $10 million. The year before, we spent $12 million and got 8 properties, or whatever you think is valuable, so that we have a sense of what we get out of it. I also think, especially for a lot of these CIP projects, dealing with TSA implementation, regional trails, things like that, often those are big single projects, right? So it's a regional trail project like the extension of the Canyon Trail or something, where it's like a big project, a lot of money goes in. Those might be good things for us to have a reference of why it costs $500,000, this last year or something like that, just as a helping me understand sort of idea.
I have a couple questions about the relocation. For the temporary move, is that just the people from Cherryvale, or the people from currently in the annex staying there?
And chime in, the two of you as well. But most of our staff will be moving. We'll have some field operations still working out of Cherryvale and the Ute, but every work group will actually be represented at the interim location at the hub.
Okay. And are you able to say where the interim location is? I don't know if that's still, sometimes real estate negotiations are confidential, but if you can say,
yeah,
I think the
I'm going to
public
mix
would
up
like
the
to know.
address, so I'm looking in the I believe it's 2520 55th Street.
Right.
Yes.
Well done. get it. Give me a second.
Are you mapping that for us, Kevin?
She's mapping.
Okay, good, thanks.
How close is that to the Humane Society?
I was just about to say, pets and dogs or something.
It's a dog walk away.
Yeah. It's it's right at Flatiron Parkway and 55th, so just below Pearl Parkway.
Great path access.
Yeah, exactly. I see the Boulder Creek path right there.
And busing and everything, yeah.
I think we probably ought to be clear, because we may be giving, I second the substantive points that were made on the need for additional financial information, but they're really two different work streams, which although they hopefully are operating under the same sort of premises, they're actually two different streams. One is the budget side of things, which has its own sort of timeline, and the other is the master plan related work, where I think if you were to put it in a bucket, you would say it's in the bucket of supplementing the system overview report with further financial information. And I think we maybe ought to just clarify whether, maybe it's not your question to Kurt, is whether the request here is for information as part of the budget cycle, which is probably a good bit faster than an addendum to the system overview report would be. And to make clear kind of what the ask is here, because I think I don't want to confuse two different work streams.
I agree, Tom, and probably Karen should also answer, because I think we're talking maybe to two different things. I'm thinking in addition to the budget process, I was thinking more providing information into the focus area discussions as part of the master plan,
Yeah.
not a revision to the system overview. But Karen, you maybe were thinking a little differently.
I agree with Andrea that we really need more trends. And in working with Lauren, I have been looking at 2012 forward to today, and then some projections on as we have here in our packet. And I have found that helpful because it was not only before flood, but it was before the 0.15% sales tax addition was passed. And so I think that gives us the kinds of trends that you are suggesting. And I'd like to see that. It doesn't really matter to me. It seems like they're both similar in terms of timelines, whether it comes to us as part of these sequence of budget-oriented meetings, or in terms of the June joint study session with council. It seems to me they both converge in terms of the timeline. But I think the information is relevant to both of those decision-making processes.
So if I may, I'd add that I think for in the long run, this is really valuable. And for public outreach, I think it's really helpful. But for my own sake, in my last year on this, after every year we look at the budgets and it's a bunch of numbers. And some numbers are bigger and some numbers are smaller. It's really hard to evaluate and ask our opinion when we're like, I don't know, is $2 million too much for this? Well, I don't know. If you said this is what $2 million is getting us, this is what $2 million got us last year or 5 years ago, that might give me a real sense of whether or not the priorities that are outlined here match what you described for the department right now. Regardless of the master plan in the future, if you would like an opinion on what is good about the budget or what should be changed, it's helpful to know what the numbers are buying us. That's all I'm asking for.
And I'd elaborate on that with two sort of specific asks. This may be more on the master plan side, but I think Karen may be right that it all comes together in June, but that's not so far from now, and I don't want to, if that's an unreasonable timeline, then, we say so. But one is sort of matching the future dollars for acquisitions against the acquisition plan, and to have I realize there's lots of possible scenarios, but to have something that allows the public to see, based on what we're now projecting, how does that match up against the acquisition plan? Does that, either in terms of what percentage of the plan will we be able to accomplish at 5 years out, 10 years out, 20 years out, or some sensible planning horizon to allow people to see, given the kind of dollars we have, where do we think we're going to be 5, 10 years from now in terms of the acquisition plan? Do we get a large chunk of the way there, or are we just, nibbling a small fraction of it? 'Cause I think that's something that is a little hard to do when you just see two sets of numbers. Here's an acquisition plan of 5,000 acres, and here's a stream of money to sort of bring those two together. And the other is to match the dollars against particularly on the maintenance side. A lot of it is the deferred maintenance, but to give the public the same kind of time frame of, well, based on the dollars we anticipate spending and based on the work plan, and assuming no, major catastrophes, at what point will we eliminate the deferred maintenance? How do those two streams come together in terms of the dollars and the work that has to be done, so that people can judge, how should we move the money around based on how well we're doing. Those may, as I say, be more on the master plan side, but they're two kind of specific things I think be very helpful in sorting out priorities.
Go for it.
So the feedback and the questions, the discussion's really helpful, and we'll be able to go back and do some additional work. And I would say that some of what you're talking about is in this budget process, and some of what you're talking about is building the financial scenarios for the master plan. And we won't be able to do all of what you're talking about for the draft CIP for next month. But rest assured that the desire you have is also the desire we have. And I think building the financial scenarios and for the master plan process will be helpful for all of us. But I kind of need to manage expectations a little bit, but the questions are really helpful. The policy issues you're lifting up for us are really helpful, and we'll bring back best we can for the next couple of months.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, Lauren, can we get your slides, please? I feel
Yeah, of
like
course.
it's a great synopsis.
Yep, will do.
The next up we have is an update on agricultural resources master plan implementation combined with agricultural center update. And since they're getting ready also, I'm going to take another opportunity to mention that the early reports on the raptor nesting season there's quite a bit of exciting activity out there, and it's a pretty promising looking season. I don't know if today's wind caused a lot of trouble, but we'd like to report out to the board later in the season, of course. But I just wanted to let you know, it looks like quite a bit of activity out there. Okay.
So thanks, Tracy. As Tracy indicated, I'm Andy Pelstra. I'm going to give the Agricultural Resource Management Plan implementation update. And after I speak for a few minutes, I'll invite Curry Rosado up to do the Agricultural Center update. You all recall that we passed the ag plan. I'm going to abbreviate it to ag plan. There's a lot of words to get out when you say Agricultural Resources Management Plan. But we passed the ag plan last July after pretty significant outreach to the community, including the agricultural community. And we all know that the plan is broad in scope, and we hope provides us some good direction for us to continue to develop the agricultural program to meet community needs. Most importantly, this plan formalized a stewardship and leasing framework. And also it kind of solidified some of the ecological integration concepts that were identified in the grassland management plan. And it also provided lots of new direction and ideas for us to build on for community connections and partnerships. And that's an opportunity that Curry's going to speak to you in a few minutes here. In developing the plan, we heard a lot from the agricultural community that they would like to have more opportunities like we had in the plan development, to have some dialogue with agricultural staff. And you guys might also recall that there was some concern regarding agricultural leasing rates as we were working through the plan development. In response to this, we invited all of our agricultural tenants to 3 listening sessions this spring. We held 3 sessions, 2 hours each, to talk about things that were important to them and for us to move forward with the implementation. And these included the agricultural leasing rates, the stewardship planning and documentation, and also the topic of agricultural housing. And in the plan, it was made pretty clear that maximizing revenue or cost recovery weren't necessarily the priorities for the agricultural leasing program, or probably not really possible given the scale of what we were trying to do. But really, we wanted these rates to recognize the value of the stewardship of our property that the agricultural tenants bring. We wanted to make sure that the lease rates are reflective of the intensity of the current uses on the land. And, you know, most importantly, we want to maintain an economically viable opportunity for these folks. Without the agricultural community, we certainly can't steward these agricultural properties. I'm not going to go through all these numbers, but the slide does show the proposed rates that we developed and seem to be supported by the agricultural community during the listening sessions. And for reference, on the right side of that graphic, you see Boulder County Parks and Open Space rates. They're our closest partner in, or closest peer in this programmatic area. We're somewhat close to them, a little on the cheaper side, and these seem to be rates that everybody was comfortable with to move forward. And we'll start using these rates as we negotiate renewed leases. And, you know, I think we all believe that these rates seem to reflect the primary objectives of what we were trying to achieve in the plan. So as far as next steps for this year, we will start working with the individual tenants. There was good agreement on the rates, although you could tell in the crowd that there's still some uncertainty of exactly how that's going to impact them. So we want to take some time this year to work more fully with them on an individual basis. And the 2 agricultural staff, we do have 2 stewardship plans for each of them in the work plan, so a total of 4 stewardship plans to develop in 2018. So they'll work on those as a staff effort. In the listening sessions, one topic that raised a lot of discussion was how important the agricultural housing is to our group of tenants. We had a really good dialogue the day of that listening session. It brought up some questions that really need some staff work before we can move forward strongly in that area. We want to make sure we work this year to develop a better understanding of the demand. So we'll work on that as we're discussing the lease rates. We also want to get a better understanding of what the regional practices are. We heard different stories in that room of how they're accommodating their agricultural workers, and so we want to understand what's happening within the region. And another thing that's important for the department is the revenue that we currently receive for the residential program goes to manage those structures. So we want to take a look at how, if we change all of these into agricultural housing, how is that going to impact that program? And we'll also, not all of the houses may be suitable for use for the agricultural tenants. So some staff work there, and hopefully we can come back at a later time with some work done there. And we've been working hard. We also heard from the agriculture community that there was some lots of infrastructure maintenance that needed to be completed. We've worked hard since the plan implementation or plan completion, and also this year we do plan to fully utilize capital budgets. We fully utilized plus used some reserves last year, so we have a lot of momentum moving forward there. And lastly, we want to see how our talks go with the agricultural tenants this year and determine future communication strategies, try to get a good feel for, do we need to do listening sessions again next spring, or are we getting enough dialogue as we work on these lease rates? So that is what I hope to accomplish by the end of this year. We'll see if we can meet those goals. Before I open up for questions, though, I want to let Curry get through her part of the presentation. So Curry, do you mind coming up?
Thanks, Andy, and hello, good evening. I'm Curry Rosado, Education Supervisor with Open Space Mountain Parks, and also project manager for this phase of our Agriculture Center project. So I'm very excited to give you an update tonight. Next. So take a peek at this graphic here. It's a lovely Wordle, and I wanted to highlight, you might be thinking, what is an agriculture center? And some of the words on here are definitely the themes and topics coming up in conversations that we're currently having with the Boulder Open Space Conservancy that I'll be updating you on here in just a moment. But themes like agriculture, preserving and enhancing local agriculture, connecting community to and providing information about local food and its connection to health, and also working with farmers and ranchers on local food production techniques and helping to raise the next generation of farmers and ranchers. So community, local, farm, connections. These are all guiding principles that we're discussing in this early stage of an agriculture center. So take a moment to imagine a school bus pulls up to an open space property, an agriculture center, and out come 50 eager third grade learners to learn about local farming and ranching techniques, and to maybe taste the food themselves. Or imagine on an evening, a group of farmers and ranchers and community members that are gathered together to learn from an expert, maybe a local expert, maybe an expert from somewhere else in the country that's come to the center to share and to inspire stewardship of our lands. So an update on where we're at here. As staff, we've been meeting with the Boulder Open Space Conservancy, our amazing partners that we're working with to steward the land and to help provide value-add services to our current work. And one of the focus areas for BOSC, Boulder Open Space Conservancy, is community connections to food. And the project related to that is this agriculture concept, this concept of a potential agriculture center. Just want to be sure that everyone knows that our conversations are guided by, of course, our charter purposes, but also what's laid out in the Agriculture Resources Management Plan, many of which are in the visitor integration section. BOSC's work on this project is certainly looking towards providing value-added services that are consistent with the ag plan. So our next steps are to have listening sessions as we are meeting and having conversations around the potential for an agriculture center. It's important to check in with the community. You know that very well. And so we're planning to have listening sessions. The first one will be next. I shall say there was a pilot listening session with our partners, with our BOSC partners through a farm forum. Thank you very much, Kurt, for being there. He was able to attend that. And that generated a lot of excitement for this potential of an agriculture center. But as staff, we're managing and looking towards focus groups with our open space lessees and also other farmers and ranchers in the community. That'll be next week. Actually, is the follow-up from Andy's series of listening sessions. And then in early May, we're going to have focus groups to hear about what's important and what do you envision in an agriculture center from some key focus groups such as the Latino community, as well as our friends in the education community, farm-to-school community, and school district. And then we are excited for a large community listening session on May 17th. And that'll be in a World Cafe style, but I won't get into the details. You, of course, will be invited to come, and we're really looking forward to those next steps, checking in with the community. So at this point, I'd like to bring Andy back up, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Great. Thanks, Curry and Andy. Kevin?
Andy, I just had one sort of tangential question. I remember a few years ago talking about local food production, and one of the people who had been working on that said that one of the challenges was actually local meat processing. Is that still a challenge for us in the Boulder area?
Yeah, that is still a challenge, although I do understand that there is a facility that is working on its organic certification. So I think that is in progress, but it hasn't fully moved forward yet.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to comment on two of the meetings you guys have mentioned. Curry mentioned the BOSC meeting up at Altona Grange a couple weeks ago, and I was lucky enough to get there. And I have to say, it was one of the most remarkable public events I've been to in a long time. There were, I don't know, 125, 150 people. Yeah, I mean, probably we shouldn't say that in front of the fire marshal, but it was packed, and the energy was tremendous. And so, anyway, it's just gives you a taste of the interest there is across Boulder County and lots of different interests that could come together around an agricultural center. So I thought they did a great job managing all that energy, and so it was just a lot of fun to participate in. So thanks, Curry, for making sure I got there. And then the listening session that I got to, the one you had last week, I guess now, I was just struck by what a challenge housing is for our ag partners. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. I mean, everybody in Boulder struggles with affordable housing, and we've got, 25,000 students that are on top of that, all looking for a place to live. And so it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that folks that are seasonal labor for agriculture really get squeezed out. And I think as this generation of farm families moves out and we're trying to get the next generation in, I think that issue is just going to get more and more difficult because we may not have as many of our farmers and lessees living in their historical ranch property. So I really appreciate the listening session you had. My gosh, it was a who's who of Boulder County farming that was there. It was really quite remarkable to see the families that were represented there. So anyway, I just appreciate all the efforts that's going into listening right now with all of our different groups. I know there's more work to be done to sort of knit those groups together into a common vision. But anyway, I just want to say thanks, and it's been really interesting.
Thank you.
If I may, in the context of the Ag Center, Curry, could you speak to regional partners, so partners beyond BOSC? Like, are we talking to the county at this point?
Right. Excellent question. At this point, it's so early in the dialogue around what is an agriculture center that partnerships consistently comes up. There are no specific partnerships. BOSC is having conversations with different potential entities, and but at this point, officially, who those partnerships are,
okay,
they haven't been defined.
I could just jump in really quick. I have had a conversation about it with Eric Lane, who's the director for the Boulder County Parks and Open Space System. So. And our intention is to bring Boulder County into the conversation, and he's up for it.
Great.
Great, thanks.
And sorry, can I just add? Yeah, and they recently got a new ag manager. Jeff Moline was the former temporary ag manager, so we're working with that new person as we go forward.
Cool. The listening sessions are going to be a great way to bring those folks in.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. I also appreciate the update. And I have a question for Curry, I guess, maybe two questions. I think the county has an ag center. Can you explain the similarities and differences between the county ag center and the city proposed ag center? And secondly, it seems to me, unless you're working overtime, that something's got to be displaced by this. So what you're shedding from your responsibilities so that you have time to take on this?
Thank you, Karen, for your questions. They're excellent. So I'm excited to share with y'all that I had a chance to go. You're correct. Boulder County, to answer your first question, Boulder County operates a phenomenal agriculture education center and historical cultural center. Mm-hmm. I forget the name of the street, but I had a chance to go and meet with their team that facilitates those interpretive programs, and as well as extension of their agriculture team. And at this point, one thing that is in our conversations we know we don't want to do is duplicate efforts or compete with any existing successful agriculture, be it education effort. So we are fully aware of that program. It's incredibly successful, supported by the county. So at this point, the idea would not be to duplicate that effort. That said, again, we're at early conversations. We'll see what comes out through the community listening sessions. But I feel very confident saying the intent is not to duplicate that effort, but more to complement and support existing efforts. There's some other examples out there like that. Now, for example, the farm field trip programs, there's many, many amazing initiatives happening, and we wouldn't want to duplicate or compete with those efforts. So excellent question. With regards to work planning, and thanks for asking, I have an incredibly supportive team and supportive management, and we're constantly prioritizing our programming to make sure that we can do the best job at what's on our plate, and to seek out for partnerships. I can't say how wonderful it is to work with the Boulder Open Space Conservancy. Amazing, committed group of folks. So, so far, so good.
So you're not getting rid of anything off your plate?
If I can, Carrie, do you want me to step in?
You're welcome.
Yeah, no. Carrie's
You're working overtime, in other words.
Right. Yeah, no, it came up in discussion about what is the Ag Center, and Curry's been great to take that lift. She actually has an excellent background coming to us in local foods, agriculture, working with nonprofits. She also is the education supervisor. And at the minute, Curry's also putting together a service delivery model for how we do environmental education, interpretation, work with all our partners. And Curry's just doing an amazing job. And so far, she's actually really succeeding well with the workload that she has. I think as we go ahead into the future, there will be discussions about who does lead the Ag Center project. If it turns into something more concrete like bricks and mortar, that wouldn't be Curry's role in the future, for example. And then she would be working on other projects as they come up. So I think we will look at how the Ag Center evolves and who is the right project manager for that in the future, depending on exactly what direction it takes.
Thank you. Thank you. Any additional questions?
Mark, I take it from your comment that it's not a done deal that this is a separate bricks and mortar operation where people will be physically staffed there. That's
right. We're at that early stage where we're trying to figure it out, and it's that exciting point of seeing, what is it about it that will work for the city of Boulder, and then work with our partners and our regional partners.
Any other questions or comments for Curry or Andy? No?
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Tracy, anything else from the department? All right.
Yes. I just want to give a quick update that I believe it was last week that the council heard the OSO part of the 311 Mapleton, and their determination is that it's probably but not clearly an error. So I just want to, if you hadn't read about it or heard about it, I'm just passing that along. And the next step for council is that they're actually going to hear the development proposal, and I believe that is scheduled in June. So that, and you had already done your part as a board of giving your advice to the planning board about the open space elements of the development. You stayed away from all the other parts of the development, and you gave your advice on any sort of open space implications. So you've done your part, and the planning board is going to hear that project in May, I believe, and then after they make their recommendation, it'll go on to city council in June.
Okay. So both to be clear and also for the public's benefit, we're not expecting that this issue comes back to this board.
Correct.
We're counting.
Do you wish to make that a motion? Okay. Oh, and I guess I'll just give one other thing on the Eagle Cobalt Trail. If you recall, there is a survey going on right now out in the community, and that is, we're sort of midway into the surveying of getting letting people know the change that we're looking at making, getting their feedback, and we'll be able to report back about that, I believe, at the next meeting. So.
But as I had reached out to Jim about this, and so as I understand it, there's currently signage at key trail intersections out in the system currently. Could you explain
Yes. what's
what's been deployed briefly?
Yes.
I mean, I don't want it to amount to reporting out, but I'd like to understand what's going on right now.
Okay, Jim, do you mind? Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
So, good evening, Board. Jim Reeder, excuse me, Trails and Facilities Service Area Manager. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We put out basically 6 signs, a sign at the top and bottom of each of the trails and also at the trailheads and access point that are associated with those trails. We put those out on March 27th, and then last week on the 6th, we modified those signs due to some concerns that they weren't quite as pushing the point as to why we were doing it as well as we should have done. At the same time that we did that, we also upgraded what we had on our website. So that's the way it stands right now. Tracy's absolutely right. The survey will be live until the end of the day on the 18th. So we've got about a week more to go on that. I can tell you that, excuse me, at this time, last I checked, we had 144 surveys filled out, which is a tremendous, we feel a tremendous response at this point. And we fully expect more. We're also getting some comments via email and Facebook. So once that survey is closed, we will be compiling all the responses we get and then bring those results back to this board next month. Cool. Now, I haven't had a chance to look at the responses very deeply, but I can tell you that there are responses on both ends. Don't do a damn thing, and do it now, and everything in between. So, you know, where the numbers turn out, we'll just have to see.
Okay.
Oh.
All right. Thank you for the explanation. I appreciate it.
You bet. Any other questions?
And I assume that announcement of the surveys and what's on the website are at the trailheads and
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So, okay, thank you.
I'm happy to introduce the next item, which is the Volunteer Services Annual Report and also the declaration to honor open space and mountain parks volunteers, including yourselves as board members, of course. I want to introduce Janelle Freeston and Christine Weinberger. I do want to just make a small point before they start their presentation that, you know, they reach out to approximately, is it 2,000, Janelle? How many volunteers?
We have active 1,800 on our listserv.
Which,
well over 3,000 people interested in volunteering. So.
And I think it's one of those things that often is in the sort of under the hood, I'd say, not truly recognized sometimes. The amount of people that work for open space and the amazing difference they make to the department and the facilities and the natural resources. And I would like to point out that Janelle has this year and last year been working on a citywide effort to coordinate volunteers across the city. So it leads to efficiencies as well with databases, et cetera. And as we go into this perhaps fiscally constrained period, it's a way to actually improve the services we can provide without adding to the budget. And Janelle's done a great job on looking at those types of efficiencies. So I'll pass it over to Janelle.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, and thank you again, members of the board. As volunteers, you show up in the numbers that we will be talking about tonight to go over our 2017 highlights and plans for 2018. And this topic we're always on the board agenda at the right time, because next week is National Volunteer Week, when we'll be celebrating volunteers. And I want to also honor the volunteers that are in the audience and people that might be at home who are volunteers for us or who would like to be volunteers for us. They will find out more. Put our little hat right there. Great. So with that, I'll talk a little bit more about who our staff is for just a minute. So here's our team: Mark leading the helm of CCNP, Community Connections and Partnerships, and then Lisa Deeroff, who can't be here tonight. Kristen, who you will hear from. We have a new member of our team, Halise Rupi, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, how we delineate the programs and projects. And Anna Sutherland is our field coordinator. And then Natasha Steinman will be joining our team, focusing on the Junior Ranger Service Learning Program. And I just want to call out there are other people in our department. If we didn't have the staff support and the director's team support to support these volunteers, we wouldn't be able to do the great work that we're able to do with these amazing people. So Bo Clark is here tonight. We had Dave Berry last year, and then there's other staff who are the field leads for these volunteers. And so for this year, these are similar numbers from last year. We're really excited. What an amazing impact. And this impact by number, there's much more behind that. There's the stories, there's the individual contributions that these volunteers are making, the connections that they're making out there with visitors, the issues that they're bringing to our attention that they notice out in the system. So it's just, we cannot thank our volunteers enough for the work that they do for us. We do want to take a moment tonight to honor a volunteer, Jeff Parks, who passed away in the line of duty while he was volunteering as a Raptor monitor. You may have seen the article in the Daily Camera. Many staff have poured their hearts out, and other volunteers who got to know him and talked about his passion and his love for birds. And so our hearts go out to his family, and we honor him tonight in his memory. I'm now going to pass it over to Kristen Weinberger, and she'll tell us more about the one-day volunteer projects.
Thank you, Janelle. Oh, thanks. So you can see with 2017, our totals is for volunteers and hours. And then to the right, we have a map. And this was really to show where groups are located. And this is only half the year. This is until July. So it's to show where they're located and then which work groups they're served under. And then, so I created this pie chart to really define where our groups are putting their time into. And we had a total of 84 one-day volunteer projects in 2017. And out of that total, we had the highest number is our special use groups. And I'm gonna hand it over to Bo Clark right now, and he's gonna talk about the volunteer trail program.
Good evening. Just a brief snapshot of what volunteers did on the trails in 2017. We hosted 21 unique trails projects, 413 volunteers, and 2,500 hours spent working on our trails, either constructing new or maintaining our existing trail network. Some of the numbers include 1,400 feet of trail constructed or maintained, over 1,300 feet undesignated trail restored, 85 tons of material transported. I think what's even more important than these numbers is that within the Trails program, working with volunteers, about half of our groups are made up of what we call kind of special interest groups. This includes agencies like Boulder Climbing Community, Flatirons Climbing Council, Boulder Mountain Bike Alliance, Volunteers for Outdoor Colorado. And I think these are really critical to highlight because they give us a better understanding of the user trends and the use patterns that are going on. I rely on the climbers to be updating me on what they're seeing on the ground, what kind of improvements need to be made before things get worse or before we fall behind the schedule. And I'd also just like to say that from my perspective, the way we're best able to continue forward with the maintenance of our trails is through engaging more volunteering, because our workload, as you can imagine, trails workload is quite big, and I think that volunteers are able to fill in these little niche gaps of particularly trail maintenance where our staff is on other projects and West TSA or North TSA goals as they come about. So, and then lastly, I'd just like to highlight another unique relationship we have is we work with we have a service agreement with the Front Range Climbing Stewards. They're a small outfit who specializes in climbing access only. Transporting stone and building with stone on climbing access. But what's really cool is they pull in 3 to 4 volunteers every day, and they essentially double their group size every day from the local climbing community to work on these projects. So I think that these partnerships and these little avenues that we're able to fold volunteers into our maintenance and goals is just kind of a really cool thing. So pass it back over.
So I just want to say we had Bo Clark come in and speak to the Trails program just because it shows how massive we are. Even though we have all these volunteer coordinators, we also have within work groups volunteer coordinators, which is so impressive. So thank you so much, Bo. Really appreciate it. So the next slide, we're going to talk about the contracts that Volunteer Services manages. So in 2017, we created a new crew with Ready to Work, and it was a pilot crew. So this happened to us, I think, in early spring, April, and they wanted to work by June, and we made it work. And it was a multi-department collaboration. A ton of work went into it. It was very successful. We worked with Parks and Rec. They split time with Open Space and Mountain Park, so every other week, and they started in June, and they worked till October. What else? They will be back in 2018, so we're very pleased with that. And then the first person to the left of this photo, this is Gilbert Maldano. He is our Ready to Work crew leader. He is just praised by field staff of what a great job he does with the crew. They started in March this year to help out water resources, so some of our work groups, they do not have field support, so they really rely on this contract. So the Ready Work program, it truly changes people's lives. In 2017, one of the Ready crew members, they started working for us, for Open Space and Mountain Park. So they expressed interest in it, and then we were able to find a position. He impressed some people, and yeah, he's still with us. So it's really a wonderful partnership. So thank you.
And then the final facet of the volunteer services programs and projects is the long-term. So we have the projects, the contracts, and then the long-term programs that volunteers make a commitment for. And here are some of the impressive numbers from last year. This is a photo of our interagency bike patrol program, and last year they made over 3,000 contacts with people. That's actual face-to-face helping people out on the trails. And they biked the equivalent distance of Alaska to Argentina. Now that's throughout all of the agencies. That's not just city, but it's city, county, U.S. Forest Service, and park, and Valmont Bike Park. But so incredible, so impressive. And this is how the hours are broken out by long-term program volunteers. And as you can see, a lot of the hours are towards education and monitoring. And so education is the bike patrol. It's also our volunteer naturalists. It's our bear care team and our trail guide park patrollers. When you get the, we're gonna be getting you our annual report at the end of April after National Volunteer Week. And so we'll have a better breakout there so you can see the finer details of that. And then I'm going to pass it back over to Bo. This was an exciting program we started last year. It's the Trail Custodian program. So he's going to tell you some highlights from that last year.
This was a pilot, began last year, like Janelle mentioned, that we had 13 interested candidates who wanted to become trail custodians, where we would give them a very brief training, and they, on their own time, unscheduled, would go out and without tools, they would do tool-free maintenance of our trails, meaning picking up litter, clearing debris from trails. They had a very kind of limited scope of service, but we felt that they were our kind of eyes and ears on the ground where we can't get to on a daily basis. So the one major thing that they were able to do, and you'll see the map on the right, is they were actually able to just drop a pin, take a photo, that would come to me and I could see, and they would report issues that, hey, you know, I'm noticing this when I'm out on a run. I'm noticing this when I'm out on a bike. So we had a lot of good reporting, and the hope is that we continue this we will continue this in 2018. But I'd like to offer more training, continue to sort of expand the level at which they're able to help us out. And this kind of goes in collaboration with, part of our goals are to collaborate with partner agencies like Boulder County Parks Open Space to train together, because a lot of our volunteers are using two different trail networks, but their skill sets should align. So we're looking at further training for the Trail Custodian program, as well as we're going to be hosting a rock skills training in early May for members of our mountain bike community who are more interested in learning more technical trail skills to help us out with their maintenance. So just a few more ways we're trying to branch out.
And then what is in store for 2018? We just finished Q1 and we are busy with all these initiatives listed here. I'm not going to explain all of them, but I will call out there are some exciting initiatives with the City Volunteer Cooperative. We will be putting out this week the first ever citywide volunteer impact report, so look for that. There was an IP to Council that just went out this week. So again, that's so exciting. Without this cooperative group, in the past we were, different coordinators were coming up with their own hours and running their own programs, and now we really are streamlining, working together, excuse me, to make this a seamless experience for volunteers across the board. And we have a one-stop shop website now, which is bouldercolorado.gov/volunteer, and that's the volunteer cooperative website, which links to then our site and all the other sites. And if you have any questions about any of these, please feel free to ask questions. I do want to mention, too, I'll give these to Leah. As volunteers and as part of National Volunteer Week, we brought a little thank you gift for you, and Karen and Andrea, we have your volunteer hats. So your hours are incorporated in our totals for the board. Excuse me, so with that, we want to thank you. Again, thank everyone in the audience. And Tom, if you would give us the honor of reading the declaration for the volunteers for National Volunteer Week.
Okay, I'll try. The Open Space Board of Trustees joins the staff of the City of Boulder Open Space and Mountain Parks Department in recognizing all of our volunteers during National Volunteer Week 2018. We salute the more than 1,811 open space and mountain parks volunteers who contribute their talents and efforts in helping the department carry out its mission. These individuals are an inspiration as they help to protect the resources that make Boulder so special.
Thank you. And with that, any questions?
This is set for a public hearing. Leah, do we have any? Nope. Okay, we'll close the public hearing.
I just have a quick question. I know that the climbing stewards have contracts with agencies. I'm wondering if the other, I think you called them partnering groups, do each of those have contracts with OSMP that gets the leadership in sync with the staff, or are some of those volunteer-led?
A lot of them are volunteer-led. We do have contracts with Youth Corps, Mile High Youth Corps, American Conservation Experience. Front Range Climbing Stewards are a little bit unique in that they are a professional trail crew, and it's a service agreement that we've agreed upon for a 5-year deal with them. Does that kind of answer your question? But most of, for example...
what about groups like WRV? Is that a contract or is that a volunteer?
Kristen could probably speak to that.
So WRV was like VOC. They are a contract, but we do pay them. And they are volunteers, too. So it's a volunteer organization that gets paid.
But the leadership connection is paid. It works directly with you to plan and decide.
Yes,
what
absolutely.
Great, thank you. And thanks for all you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think that takes us to matters from the board. The first one is the Master Plan Process Committee. Darren, do you want to?
She's like, no.
It's sort of traditional to draft Darren to give our report.
Nothing like putting her on the spot.
Or I guess we could start drafting Mark.
Yeah, very soon.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. I had not prepared remarks tonight, thinking that you might have some conversations that you wanted to have yourselves. I'm here to answer any questions you have, though.
Are you guys still having your process committee meeting roughly 2 weeks out of sync with this meeting?
Yes, that's our permanent schedule.
Okay.
We met last week and meet again in 2 weeks.
Okay. Do you remember what occurred a week ago?
Darren, do you mind?
Poor Darren.
Sure. No, I'm happy to help out. No problem. So we talked about several things, one of which was the substantive comments that we had received on the system overview report, and we brought some options to the process committee to consider in terms of how and whether we needed to address those in any different way. We had agreed originally that comments on the report would be if they were related to factual errors or corrections that needed to be made. For For example, even as simple as a web link that was broken could be made in an addenda. And that larger substantive comments needed to be addressed in future updates to the plan. Some of the comments that we had gotten in the process would require quite a bit of work, and so we just wanted to make sure that we were all comfortable, that the process committee was comfortable with that setup that we had. Otherwise, we would have needed to make a change to the schedule in order to address those comments more fully. The process committee did affirm our current schedule, our current approach, rather than seeking a pause in the schedule to address those comments fully. So that was one of the primary things that we discussed. And
you gave a lot of really interesting numbers about the numbers of people that gave comments on the report, that gave it on the survey, and you probably don't have those in your head, but I guess a question would be, if people were interested to see those feedback, could they go to the website? Would it have that?
Not yet, but we will have a report coming out, scheduled to come out on May 7th, and that will summarize all of our engagement findings at that time. So that'll be an opportunity to see what that looks like, as well as the resulting themes and preliminary focus areas that arose from that first engagement period.
So I'd report on a few things. One is that I think the committee was unanimously happy with the way the public engagement has been going so far. Aaron Brockett said, and this is not an exact quote, but it's close, that he thought this was the best public engagement he had seen by any city process.
I think you used the word a model.
A model, okay.
Yes.
Let's see. So in terms of next steps, on May 7th is when the second engagement window will open. We have a board meeting, we'll discuss that in a minute, but we have a board meeting on the 9th. And then the engagement window was originally going to close on May 18th, but that got moved.
May 20th.
May 20th, okay. Got moved a few days back. And just a reminder, on June 12th, we have our study session with council.
Correct. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it.
And there was a fairly robust discussion of the question of a pause, because there were some substantial concerns from members of the community that the system overview report needed some additional material, either gaps or more detail on things that were covered. And I think the view of the process committee was not to take a pause, but to continue sort of with addenda to the system overview report and address, as we're going along, how we're doing relative to timeline and various milestones we've set for ourselves, but to continue on our current track.
So just to continue on, the next phase is to identify focus areas that will be areas of significant detailed discussion with the community, potentially across all the different charter purposes. And of course, one of the purposes of the system overview report was to give the public information from which they could make recommendations about focus areas. And so that will be really the next thing that staff will be doing, I think, is bringing back some possibilities there. And you also presented the types of information that would be presented in support of different focus areas, pulling on the public input and input from previous monitoring programs and other reports, and staff's input too. And I think in the end, the committee was happy with that collection of information, that would give us enough information when we get to council in the study session to say, yeah, we think these are important focus areas for the master plan going forward. So I thought that was a big step. Thank you.
You bet.
And so the plan is to release the focus areas 2 weeks before the joint study session with council. So that would be, so we won't, as a board, be addressing those prior to our joint study session, but also we have a board meeting the next night.
That's right. And just to clarify and reiterate what Tom just said, so from May 7th until May 20th, we'll have that engagement summary that also is reflective of the preliminary focus areas that emerged from this first engagement window. And that 2-week period is an opportunity to confirm or affirm those preliminary focus areas in a way that is supportive of the joint study session with board and council, so that board and council has a little bit more of a pulse to understand, are we getting the mark? Are we getting near the mark, so that council and board can have further discussions about that? And then later this fall, pending the confirmation of the focus areas, is when we would get into the more substantive conversations around strategies.
Just a couple of numbers that I had jotted down. So we had 100 plus people at the first event at the Jewish Community Center, 420 plus people the second event at the library, about 1,500 total people engaged, 679 people had completed the online survey, including 2 organizations, and then a fair number of other people at the general session. And just as we will have a facilitator at the June 12th study session with council.
And I recognize a couple of you might not be at the May board meeting itself, but I'll also be presenting the engagement summary at that time for those who are here too.
And I should mention that I will miss the next process committee meeting. And so I would suggest, since Karen has been at every process committee meeting, that she substitutes for me, if that's okay with the rest of the board.
Sounds fine.
Fine.
Except that I won't be.
It's April 25th.
Yeah, I'll be on an airplane.
Oh.
It was a good thought, though. Okay, volunteers.
April 25th?
At noon.
Noontime.
We provide lunch if you.
You provide, well,
Yeah.
you know the way to my heart. Let me check
There
my
you go.
calendar here. The 25th at noon. I may be able to make that.
Okay.
I probably can make that. Andrea, if you
You want to
can,
upgrade from
if
a
you
maybe?
can definitely make it, I think you're a game, but I can probably make it.
No.
Okay.
Me it is.
Great. Thanks, Kevin.
Okay. Thanks, Kevin.
All right.
So I think it makes sense, particularly since I know we're going to have 2 people missing at the May 9th meeting, that I just want to make sure that we can certainly have a full board discussion, but I particularly want to make sure that if either of you felt there was something else at the process side or substantively in terms of the system overview report or sort of things going forward that you wanted to bring forward, because we won't be together again until the study session with council. I just wanted to make sure that we've created a little bit of space now if we want to have that discussion.
But
no obligation either.
No, I really have nothing to contribute at this time. I've been comfortable with the pacing, and it's great. It's very heartening to hear the numbers with the amount of people we've engaged with. So that's exciting.
I want to bring up one thing, and that's something that Mary Young brought up at the process committee meeting, the importance of trends as we make decisions and having those presented. And as I understood it, staff was going to be able to, from existing data, supplement the system overview report with an Excel spreadsheet or something of the like that presents the kinds of monitoring that has been done over the years and making some simple observations about trends that are obvious from those monitoring efforts, ranging all the way from status of ecosystems to compliance and impacts, trail widening, those kinds of monitoring that's ongoing, and the kinds of trends that are represented in those monitoring efforts.
So I'm going to start answering your question, then let Brian finish. I will just say that the discussion with the process committee around that particular option was that if we were to prepare that level of information, that it would require a change in the schedule, because that wasn't a level of effort that we were prepared to do in this amount of time. Rather, the discussion that we landed on and Mary's sort of where she landed, I would say, is to say it would at least be helpful to see the list of monitoring projects that we've done without that additional analysis around the trends or the results that emerge from them. I don't know if you want to add anything.
And then you and I, Karen, talked after the meeting about the potential to kind of ask staff informally to give a narrative on the status of the monitoring projects. So we're still exploring whether that might be an option, but that would be, short of doing a full quantitative analysis. And
right. I have no expectation that a full quantitative analysis would be done.
Yep.
But yeah.
Okay.
I think staff's insights are really important to us. After all, they're the experts, right?
Okay, anything else on the master plan? No. So any other matters from the board anyone wants to raise?
I have an item just to say a few things about, and it's our written information number B, or letter 2. The Public Service Company of Colorado Transmission Line Replacement Project, and I appreciate the report. I have to admit it was eye-opening, and I guess the feedback, and partly I'm bringing it up now because I don't see it appearing on our agendas going forward, and so I just wanted to make a couple of comments on it and suggestions. And all of you have probably read it, but a public service company wants to replace a number of towers, really stretching from southern end of the Mesa Trail up across the front to across Shanahan and then up Bear Canyon to connect up above, ultimately with the hydro plant. Obviously, this is not something we can say will not happen. We don't get to make that decision. I'm sure they have all the easements that they need. And it does appear from reading this that staff have worked to try to steer the timing of this so that it's, out of the raptor nesting period, at least mostly. And of course, how it will happen, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of care taken to manage this activity, but it does involve all of the road and trail systems from Bear Canyon south to South Mesa Trail and the movement of a lot of vehicles and materials up those roads, as well as 1,000 helicopter trips. And, if you're carrying something with a Sikorsky Sky Crane up Bear Canyon, you're going to hear it from south of Eldo to north of Flagstaff. And so I guess my main message is I think this is going to be a big deal. And I think we want to take steps to try to get ahead of this as much as possible with information to the public. It's an unfortunate coincidence that these road and trail systems were the same 3 systems that were closed for a significant period of time, and I know Jim's nodding. Last summer, unavoidably, they were scheduled sort of last in terms of the flood repairs, and so our users that use these areas regularly, I think, are going to feel especially snake bit that now this summer, at least starting towards the end of the summer, they may face significant closures too. So whatever we can do to get the word out early and explain again that we don't control this except to try to work to manage the timing and how it happens. Also, obviously, it would be very desirable to not have all 3 of those systems closed at the same time. It'd be wonderful if we could even avoid having 2 of those systems closed at the same time because they get so much traffic. So I think those are my general thoughts, but it did strike me as something that's going to be a big deal for our public.
I did have one actual follow-on question to that that packet item, which was, we've put so much money and effort into rebuilding these trails, and now we're going to have heavy trucks driving on them. So is there an expectation that all the rebuilding will hold due to this traffic? And if not, do we have recourse for financial?
They'll have to do any restoration that is any sort of impact they'll need to restore.
Okay.
Yes.
Do we have any expectation of actual impacts? I mean, like, I assume that the work that's just been done was done to a very high standard, and maybe it's like truck ready or something. I don't know. Sorry, Jim. I know it's a long walk.
Shouldn't sit in the back of the movie theater.
Yeah, no problem. Jim Reeder again. Yeah, the trails and quasi roads are ready for this type of traffic. Okay. On the other hand, I can't guarantee that they won't cause some damage, and they can't guarantee that either. Depending on how aggressive they are and need to be when it's wet. If everything stayed dry, I wouldn't expect there to be much, if any, damage up there. But you have to understand that when they take those lines down, some places in the city, some major places in the city, like NCAR, will not have backup power. And so if their other source goes down, they're out. And they would not be happy, nor would anyone else, and certainly then with those neighborhoods. So we've discussed a lot with them. We've been working with them for, I don't know, months, no, actually over a year now, and trying to figure out all those ins and outs and making sure everything works. But Tracy's absolutely right. If they cause damage, they're on the hook to repair it. So.
Okay, thank you.
I have another question. I didn't notice whether there are any steps that they're required to take to avoid spreading any noxious weeds or invasives.
Yep, absolutely. All those restrictions are on them. They have to wash everything down before they go in and when they leave. So
great.
All the restrictions that we would put on a contractor of our own are on them and their contractors.
Great. Thank you.
You bet.
Anything else on this or any other matters from the board?
I had one more matter. So I am this board's representative to the GAC, the Greenways Advisory Committee, and with CIP season comes the annual GAC meeting, where we talk about, how many more times can I say GAC for you? Yeah. Comes the Greenways Advisory Committee has their own CIP process. And so I will not be at the May meeting, but the expectation is that I would bring items of interest from our packet when it comes out for your feedback, and I would take that feedback to the GAC meeting. The GAC meeting is fortunately being pushed out far enough that it's going to be in late June. So probably through myself and Mark Gershman, we'll put some materials out to you guys for a response, and I can get your responses at the June meeting of this board, and then take it to the Greenways Advisory Committee. So just wanted to give everyone a heads up on that I'll be asking for good feedback.
Great.
So I have one about the other point that was in the
report
in the thing this week or this month about the Lobo Trail, and I know this is coming up on the agenda, I think next month, and I also know that sometimes when you have things that affect multiple departments, you'll often bring in staff from other departments to help educate us, and I'm kind of putting in a request for that to see if we can get someone from transportation here. And my reasoning is that in the last year there were 2 fatalities on J Road. Neither of them are in the part where this trail reroute would do any good. So in fact, it might actually increase the risk of fatality because you're going to encourage more people to use J Road because you've made a nice trail on another part. And the Cottonwood Trail has no access to North Boulder whatsoever except for an illegal crossing over a railroad track right now. So my suggestion would be, can we get some sort of transportation people to come in here and discuss how this fits into the network? Because in the Daily Camera, they said, we don't know, and I just want to have some sort of sense of like, are you going to extend it further on J Road? Or are you going to go forward with the Cottonwood Trail crossing the railroad, whatever it's going to be, as part of that presentation? Because I think that would really help us have a more informed sense of how the Lobo Trail integrates with the rest of transportation.
So it's scheduled at this point for the July OSBT meeting.
We have plenty of time.
And we can certainly ask our partners at Boulder County who are leading this project to include some of these elements.
That'd be really helpful.
Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Thank you.
And it's all county land, right?
Some of the alternatives have implications for open space property, so it
Right,
depends
but-
on what options emerge from the process. But it's mostly Boulder County.
Say, for example, if they wanted to extend the trail on J Road, there's a right-of-way there that I think is city. So, and that'd be probably city and city transportation.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. Do we need city transportation
That's what
as
I was-
well
that's
as,
what I was
well as
requesting.
Boulder County?
Go ahead.
Hi, there was an open house last night at Celestial Seasonings on this, and Boulder County Transportation was there in addition to Matt Wempe, who's part of the transportation staff, but the other portions of the staff who deal with on-street features were there as well. So I think at this point, as Tracy's indicated, the county's taking responsibility and responding to this. If, for example, they might need land for or an easement or rights of way from the city, I think the J Road, especially J Road east of the diagonal, lies in Boulder County for most of its length. I think Orchard Creek, there might be a little piece out there that's been annexed. But so that would be the appropriate folks, and if they make a recommendation that we hook up with some folks from the city, we'll certainly do that.
And Mark, is it correct that basically if the alternative is on city land, that's why it would be an action item on the board, and that's why it's tentative? If it's not on city land, then it wouldn't be an action.
Well, yeah, and something's changed there. You may have noticed in your packet that all of the alternatives now shown in the map have a alternative on open space lands on the Mackenzie property.
Mm-hmm.
They spoke with the landowner who had the land where another option was being presented that would allow for routing off open space, but that person indicated no interest in having the trail on their land, so that has been removed from the alternative. So there is that was a last-minute slip-in that we did and changed the map. So we think that all the alternatives that are being considered at this point now are on, have a portion at least on OSMP lands.
Are we still on the July schedule, do you think?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else? Okay, we're adjourned.
Yay.